The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. Once upon a time, beside a beautiful lake, a mother duck was sitting on a nest full of eggs. Every day she said, "Quack, quack, I wonder when my baby ducklings will come out of their shells." Finally, one day she heard a cracking sound coming from one of the eggs, and soon she heard a peep, peep. When she looked under her wing, there was a new baby duckling. With each crack and peep, another duckling was hatched. Mother Duck admired her babies and said proudly to herself, "My, how beautiful they are." After a while, all the eggs had hatched except one. This egg was very large and did not look like the others. Mother Duck looked at this last egg and said, "Quack, quack, what's the matter with you? Why don't you crack and peep like the rest?" Mother Duck was becoming quite uncomfortable sitting on this huge egg day after day. She was beginning to lose her patience. Then one day, while she was sitting there, an old duck friend came by to visit. "How are you doing?" asked her friend. "Not very well," Mother Duck answered. "I don't know why this last egg will not hatch." "I'll bet it's a turkey egg," said the old duck. "Don't bother sitting on it any longer." But even though she was becoming very tired, Mother Duck decided to sit on this last egg just a little longer. And it's lucky that she did, for soon she heard a crack and a very loud peep. When Mother Duck lifted her tired wings, she saw a large, gray, ugly duckling tumble out of the big egg. "I've never seen anything quite so ugly and gray," Mother Duck exclaimed. "Maybe it is a turkey chick after all." A few days later, Mother Duck carefully led her new family to the lake. "It's time for you to learn to swim." She quacked loudly to her ducklings. One by one, they waddled after her. Even the big ugly duckling followed his brothers and sister into the water. Mother Duck first taught them how to float gracefully. Then she showed them how to swim with their feet turned out, the way all good ducks do. "I declare," said Mother Duck as she watched her baby swimming, "my ugly duckling is the best swimmer of all. He can't be a turkey chick." She was too pleased, and the ugly duckling was very happy too. Every day brought new adventures for the little family. Soon Mother Duck took her ducklings to the nearby farm to meet all the other animals. She was so proud of her youngsters that her feathers puffed out as she strutted around with her head held high. And all the animals loved the new ducklings too. Even Grandfather Duck came over and quacked loudly, "How lovely you all are!" But then he saw the ugly duckling. "What is that?" he squawked as he waddled away with a disgusted look on his face. A hen nearby clucked and asked the same question. "What is that ugly thing?" And a cat stared at the duckling and meowed. "Where did that come from?" Even the cow tried to poke the poor bird with her horns as he waddled by. Mother Duck quacked angrily at all of them. "Leave him alone," she shouted. "Good looks are not that important, you know." She knew he was a good duckling, and she loved him, even if everyone considered him ugly. Day after day, the ugly duckling had to put up with being teased and picked on. All the other animals poked him and made fun of him. The poor duckling felt more miserable all the time. Finally, one day, the ugly duckling just had enough. He said to himself, "I don't belong here anymore." And with big tears in his eyes, he decided to fly away. He didn't even say goodbye to Mother Duck and his sisters and brothers. He just left. As he was flying away, teardrops fell from his eyes into the lake below. The tears were so big that they made great ripples in the water. The ugly duckling felt very sad indeed. After flying for a short while, the ugly duckling came upon a big marsh beside a small pond. "This looks like a good place to spend the night," he said sadly as he flew down into the tall marsh reeds. "No one can pick on me here," and no one did, but the night was long and lonely for the little duckling as he thought about his family, whom he missed very much. When the sun began to rise the next morning, the ugly duckling heard a soft rustling sound in the tall reeds. Suddenly he found himself face to face with several wild ducks. "You certainly are ugly," the wild ducks said, "but we don't care. In fact, we like you," they added. The ugly duckling didn't know what to think, but slowly he started feeling better. Then just as the ugly duckling began to feel a little less frightened and a little less sad, he heard a loud noise from the marsh. "What was that?" "The hunters with their guns and dogs are here," said the wild ducks. "We must go." Quickly they rose from the pond and flew away, leaving the ugly duckling behind. Once again, big tears came to his eyes. He was more frightened now than ever. As the poor duckling watched the wild ducks fly away, a large black dog came dashing towards him. The duckling was so terrified that his feathers were shaking, but after sniffing the ugly duckling, the big dog just turned his head and trotted away. The duckling muttered to himself, "I'm so awful looking that even the hunting dog doesn't want me." Because the ugly duckling was afraid to move, he stayed hidden in the tall reeds for a long time. Finally, when the shooting stopped, he hurried as fast as he could away from the marsh. He was trembling so hard that he could not fly, so he ran across the meadows and fields until he didn't think he could run any more. By nighttime, the ugly duckling was so tired he decided he had to stop for a rest. He collapsed in the tall weeds beside an old, down-run cottage. As he snuggled in the weeds, the wind began to howl, and he had to sit on his wings to keep him from being blown away. The wind blew harder and harder with each new gust. The shaky chimney on top of the cottage appeared to lean a little farther to one side. The door on the house creaked, and the windows rattled. Suddenly, the ugly duckling noticed that one of the rusty hinges on the door had broken loose. As he quietly waddled a little closer to the door, he spotted a small crack on one side of it. He decided this was just about wide enough for him to squeeze through, so that's exactly what he did. He was very curious to see what was inside. When he peeked in, he saw an old woman sitting there with a hen and a cat. She was stroking the cat gently, and the cat was purring contentedly. The hen pecked quietly around the table where the old woman was sitting. The ugly duckling could tell that the woman loved the cat and the hen very much. Suddenly, the old woman looked up and blinked at the ugly duckling in a soft voice and said, "My, what a nice, fat, handsome duck you are!" The ugly duckling could tell that the old woman couldn't see very well. Then she murmured, "Why don't you stay for a while so I can have duck eggs for breakfast?" The ugly duckling was very pleased at her invitation and decided to accept. He finally felt loved. At first, he was quite comfortable in his new home, but as the days went by, the ugly duckling discovered that the old woman's cat was the master of the house and the hen was the mistress. They could do no wrong and both thought highly of themselves. They began to look down on the ugly duckling because he was not very useful. Even the old woman began to lose patience with him. Each morning she would look to see if any duck eggs had arrived, and each morning there were none. "What's the matter with you?" she said angrily to the ugly duckling. The hen clucked angrily too. "What good are you?" she asked. "You can't even lay eggs." And the cat meowed loudly. "Why can't you purr and arch your back the way I do?" The ugly duckling began to feel very sad once more. All he could think of was floating and gliding on the pond at home. Finally, one day he said to the hen and the cat, "You just don't understand me. I love to swim and dive and feel the water close to my body." The hen and the cat replied, "You've lost your mind. What a silly idea to swim and dive and get your head wet all the time. Now you just purr and be clever like us. The way you are, it's not much fun having you around here." This scolding went on all day long. By the next day, the ugly duckling could wait no longer. "I must go out into the wide world again," he said. "I must float in the water. I don't care what you think of me." "Go ahead," the cat and the hen answered. "You'll see that we're telling you these things for your own good. You'll never be as wise and clever as we are." And so the ugly duckling left the old woman, the cat, and the hen, and went on his way. In a nearby pond, he found water to glide and float to his heart's content. Every day he would swim for hours and hours, ducking his head and diving to the bottom of the pond. But still, wherever he went, no animal would have anything to do with him because he was so ugly. A few weeks after the ugly duckling left the cottage, the leaves started turning yellow and brown, and the air began to feel cooler. The wind blew harder, sending the leaves twirling to the ground below. Birds squawked and shivered in the trees and flew around as if not knowing where to go. The poor ugly duckling trembled as he sat near the edge of the pond. Once again, he felt miserable and lonely. One evening, in the cool, crisp air, a brilliant sunset appeared, and with it a large flock of beautiful white birds. The ugly duckling had never seen such lovely birds before. They were swans, showing off their graceful necks. As they flew above him, they made unusual crying sounds. A strange feeling came over the ugly duckling as he watched the swans soar higher and higher into the air. Turning and circling in the water, he became excited and began to turn somersaults. As the little duckling stretched his neck into their direction, he suddenly let out a sharp, strange honk. He had never heard himself make such a sound before. He even scared himself. But those beautiful birds were like magic to him. They made him feel happy and warm inside. He was so joyful that he dove right down to the bottom of the pond and up again with great speed. A deep feeling of love for the birds came over him, a feeling he had never felt before. He continued to watch them fly away in the direction of sunny lands and warm lakes. The ugly duckling had no idea where they had come from or where they were going. He only knew that they were dearer to him than anything he had ever known. The winter that followed was bitterly cold. Every day the ugly duckling would swim harder and harder, trying to keep from freezing. He could hear the sounds of the ice snapping and crackling close by him as he tried to keep his feet moving. Little by little, the spot he was swimming in grew smaller and smaller, and he had to keep moving even faster to prevent ice from closing in on him. Then at last he was so tired that he grew faint from exhaustion and lay very still. He was stuck fast to the ice. The next day a farmer came trudging by and saw the frozen duckling. He used his heavy black boot to break the ice and lifted the shivering bird in his arms. He carefully carried him home to his wife and children. They cared for him, but before long, the ugly duckling felt quite warm and comfortable. The children were happy to have a new pet, and naturally they wanted to play with him. But the ugly duckling was frightened, thinking they wanted to hurt him, and so he tried to fly away. Alas, he did not get very far. He flew right into the milk pail and splashed milk all around the room. From there he flew to the butter tub and then into the flour bin. What a mess he was making! The children laughed and laughed as they shouted, "You're such a funny duckling!" The farmer's wife, however, didn't think he was so funny. She screamed and waved her chubby arms in the air. "I'll get you," she yelled. With that, she grabbed a stick from the woodpile and chased the ugly duckling around the room. Giggling and laughing, the children fell all over one another with delight. But just as the ugly duckling was about to be hit with a stick, he noticed a small crack in the kitchen door. "If only I can escape through that tiny crack," he thought to himself. "I'll be safely outside where they can't get me." So he flew towards the crack and just barely squeezed through. He landed in the snow-covered bushes beside the house, but he was in such a daze that he lay there for a long time after all. When at last he felt it was safe to leave, he quietly wandered back to the tall, frozen marsh reeds around the pond. From that day until the end of the cold winter, there was nothing but more misery for the poor little creature. The ugly duckling was so busy trying to survive the harsh winter that he didn't notice that the sun was growing warmer and the birds were beginning to sing as they returned to the marsh. The frozen grass began to thaw, and the ice on the pond gradually melted. Small buds appeared on the trees in the nearby woods, and soon flowers began to poke their heads in the meadow. Spring was coming at last. One day, the ugly duckling decided it was time to try his wings. At first, they made a slight whirring sound as he moved them back and forth, but then, to his surprise, they soon were carrying him swiftly into the air. He felt very proud of himself. "How strong I have become," he thought happily. Before he knew what was happening, he found himself flying over a beautiful garden. Scents of apple blossoms and roses filled the air. Fresh young green leaves were all on the trees, and lilacs reached out over the lovely pond. Spring is certainly a wonderful time of year, the ugly duckling thought to himself. Suddenly he spotted 3 elegant swans on the pond. Floating gracefully over the water, the swans began to ruffle their feathers. The ugly duckling happily recognized the beautiful birds, but then a feeling of sadness came over him. "What majestic birds," he whispered to himself. "Oh, how I want to fly over and join them, but I know they will say how I am ugly. Still, I guess I'd rather be hurt by them than constantly be nipped and pecked by all the other animals." So the ugly duckling flew toward the swans and settled on the water. When those gorgeous birds saw him, they began to swim in his directions. The ugly duckling was sure that this would be the end of his life, so he bowed his head toward the water. As he lowered his head, he saw his own reflection in the clear, sparkling water. "Who is that?" he exclaimed in great surprise, for he saw that he was no longer a gray, ugly duckling. He had become a beautiful white swan. How excited and happy he was! The 3 elegant swans swam gracefully to him, but instead of pecking and nipping at him, they stroked him gently with their white, fluffy wings. The duckling was overwhelmed. He couldn't believe what was happening to him. With a feeling of great joy, he proudly lifted his handsome head into the air. As he looked up, some little children came skipping into the garden near the pond. They threw pieces of biscuits in the water for the swans to eat. The duckling heard one of them shout, "Look, there's a new swan over there, and he's the loveliest one of all." The children clapped their hands in delight as the other swans bowed to their new family member. The once ugly duckling shyly tucked his head under one of his wings. He was so filled with happiness that he didn't know what else to do. It seemed so new and strange. to him to be called the loveliest bird of all. What a wonderful feeling it was to be loved after being teased and disliked for so long. As he thought about the new joy he had found, he started feeling glad about all the hard times and sadness he suffered. It made him appreciate the new happiness and beauty he now enjoyed. As he swam by the other swans around the pond, the apple blossoms seemed to smile at him. The roses in the garden seemed to open their buds wider and glided towards him. He raised his head and softly murmured to himself, "When I was the ugly duckling, I never dreamed I could ever be this happy."